What does a social media specialist have in common with a science professor? What about a social justice and human rights scholar, or CEO? They are all UC Davis alumni and guests on Generation Aggie, the only UC Davis podcast in which students take the lead. I'm your host, Fiona Rose Bereyle, a recent alumna and social media intern. Join me wherever you find your podcast to learn about the lives of Aggie alumni from blue and gold lenses. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our next guest.
From teaching a class on the history of cancer to being one of my personal favorite professors, Dr. Crowder is known and loved by many, and here she is.
Hi, so I'm Dr. Marina Crowder, and it's great to be here. I am an associate teaching professor in molecular and cellular biology, but I've been at Davis pretty much for the majority of my adult life. I was an undergraduate. I majored in genetics, and I graduated in 2007. And then I also stayed at Davis and got my PhD and graduated in 2012. And now I'm back as faculty. So I've had the pleasure of experiencing Davis in many, many different roles.
What were some of your college hobbies, if you remember?
So I didn't have a ton of hobbies, and that's actually something I regret a little bit about my college experience. I had to work a lot when I was an undergraduate to support myself. I was first generation student, and so my hobbies were class, studying, and going to work. I worked at a restaurant, so at nights I would work at the restaurant. And then I got into a lab and I did a little bit of research. And so as an undergraduate, I didn't have a lot of time to get into too many extracurricular things. I was into running, so I ran a lot. But other than that, I didn't have any big hobbies.
What did you study in the lab that you worked in as an undergrad?
I studied meiosis in C. elegans, so these microscopic worms. And so we study different aspects of the regulation of meiosis and differences between in male worms versus female worms.
Okay, and since this is something I think a lot of students at Davis can relate to, how did you get into working in a lab? Since I think this is a very common question people want to know.
Yeah, so it was the end of my second year, and I had talked to a couple friends who were working in labs, and I didn't know anything about research, but I knew between my job and going to classes that I needed to do something more, that I needed to get involved in something and gain experience. And I wanted to get involved in a lab, and I did really well in a class. And the instructor had actually I did really well in an exam, and the instructor had asked me to come to their office, and it was just a way to introduce themselves and say congratulations. And so I took the opportunity to say, hey, do you have any opening positions in your lab? And the faculty member responded, like, I might, but why don't you get through this course and we'll talk about it again at the end of the course. So I did really well in the course. I went to the office hours and kind of just really tried to establish a relationship with that faculty member. And then at the end of the course, asked again, and they ended up having an opening in their lab. So I was really lucky for that opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of a good thing to think about, because I actually got into a research lab my freshman year, which is pretty unusual. And I think it really just had to do with like putting myself out there and luck. You just kind of have to be in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and actually I was in a lab before that, and it was through a friend. They were working in a lab and they needed some extra help. But the work I was doing in that lab, I wasn't learning anything new. It was making measurements and then recording them on an Excel sheet. And so I didn't feel involved, and I didn't feel like I was really getting a lot from that experience to keep doing it. And so that's where I started to look for other opportunities, because I didn't, my time was so valuable. Everyone's time is so valuable. I was like, spending all this time doing this one task over and over again, I'm not learning anything new. And so I would say not all lab experiences are great. And if you're in an experience and you're not feeling that it's working out well, to maybe look for other ones.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point too, because I think a lot of students like will come in, we think, oh, we got to get into a lab right away, and like we have to be in this lab the whole time in college. And I think, you really have to consider college as a time to explore, and if an experience isn't right for you, if you're not really gaining anything out of the experience, it is okay to go and look for other opportunities. Yeah. So I think it's a really good thing to think about as well.
I completely agree.
All right, next question, Dr. Crowder. What is your favorite memory of Davis? You have so many, I'm sure.
I have so many memories at Davis. This one is particularly hard. So I'm thinking of the strongest memories I have. And
Okay.
the strongest memory I have, one of them was moving into the dorms. Was moving in and meeting my roommate. I was in Quarto at the time. They demolished the building. It's no longer there.
Oh,
But that was really fun because it just felt so brand new. Everything was so exciting and new. And then to contrast that, another very strong memory I have was walking into my last final. I used to have earphones on. I would listen to music before the exam to try and block everything out. And it was in Rock Hall. And I remember walking up the step, which was Chem 194 at the time, walking up the steps of Rock Hall, blasting my music and just feeling like I was not too worried about the final, but just so excited. Like, this is my last final of college. Look what I've done. And I remember sitting there on the steps of Rock Hall being very excited right before this test because like it was the last final exam.
wow.
Yeah.
I had a very different experience because my last final exam was a few months ago in quarantine. So mine was online.
Yeah.
Biochemistry, and it was in the afternoon, which I do not prefer the afternoon exams. I feel like you just wait all day. And I don't know, the whole like online school thing, I felt kind of made it feel like there wasn't really a buildup. And I finished it, and then it's like, okay, now what do I do? Don't know what to do. This is kind of just random, but
Yeah, I think this whole pandemic, it's made it for the students who graduated very anticlimactic, which is, but it's still such a huge achievement, even more so to complete it online with all of the challenges.
yeah, it was very anticlimactic. I kind of just sat there and I texted my mom and I was like, well, I guess I'm done. I don't know. Like,
I remember mine because I think I had back-to-back finals, and so one was in Young Hall, and I finished that, and then I had a few minutes to get over to the other one, and I remember being nervous about making it, and so I made it, and I was like, okay, I made it. Here it is. Like, there's no emergencies. Like, I'm gonna finish this test and be done. But I think I had that anticlimactic feeling after the test of walking out, like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go home now.
what do you do? Like, I guess I'll go get food. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's funny. What are your favorite memories being a professor now?
The students, I think, just so getting to interact with students and see them grow, and then running into them again on campus and having them say hi and talk to me and hearing about what they're doing. I have so many students, so it's so nice to get time to talk with them one-on-one sometimes and hear about what they're doing, or have a student email me and say how this interaction had some impact on them that I never thought I would. And so now that those are my favorite memories now.
Yeah, I'll always remember your little TikTok dancing at the beginning of fall quarter 2021, BIS 101. I thought that was so fun, and I feel like you just really made a class so much more fun. Just with like these little things you would do, and I think a lot of people that were in your class can agree that you just make everything so fun for everyone and very memorable.
Oh, good. Well, I mean, I think learning should be, you should enjoy it. And I think if you're enjoying a class, and that, it's also part of making the class and myself approachable, and that it should be a positive experience, right? If it's not a positive experience, you're not going to learn as much. You're not going to be as engaged. You're not going to want to be there. And so it's intentional to do that. And I think, school and college and classes can already be so competitive and so serious that I think having some aspect of humility to it, to make it enjoyable, I'm glad it makes a difference. I mean, I think it does. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I was wondering now, what was the biggest obstacle you overcame during your time as an undergrad or grad student as well, if you want to talk about that?
There were a couple, I think, just major life events that were unexpected. So when I was winter break of my sophomore year, I was in a very bad car accident. And I was in the ICU and hospitalized, and I had to withdraw from classes for winter quarter. So that was completely not expected. And it was really hard to have such a big change in my plans. And also coming back from the car accident, because it took a long time to recover. I was told from doctor, I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to keep up with how I'd been keeping up before. But that car accident, and I think in having to stop everything, gave me a really good perspective. After that's when I started to look more into research and wanting to make more use of my time at Davis. So that was probably the biggest obstacle as an undergrad of having this big change in my plans and having to kind of keep going with that. And then when I was not to be downer, when I was in graduate school, my father passed away suddenly, and so again, very unexpected, kind of things that happen in your life that you don't plan for, that makes it very clear that school's not always the priority or can always be the focus. And I think when we're students in college and even now, like our jobs or school, our lives revolve around it. Like it's one of the most important things. And I think sometimes other things come up in life where it's like, maybe in this moment, it's not the most important thing. And so having to navigate around that, and be okay within those moments, having other things take more importance. And so those were two obstacles I had, but I think it gave me it definitely, now as a faculty member, when students come to me with emergencies, I think I'm way more understanding and encouraging. Like it's okay to pause right now, in class and what you're doing, because this is way more important. And that's okay if things like that come up.
Yeah, I think that's definitely really reassuring to hear as a student, because I feel like when something happens in your life and it's like school really is your life for so long. Like I think a lot of people like, place it as like the front runner, and it's like school's everything. So it's like when something happens in your life, it's like that hurts in itself, but then it's like, oh geez, like now what am I gonna do with like school? And it kind of just feels like so shocking. It's like, well, what am I gonna do now? And I think that's something a lot of people probably felt during the pandemic. And especially right away, I think we stopped going in person. I think it was like week 10 or during finals week of winter quarter of 2020. And it just, it kind of just hit us like a bus. And it's like, wow, now classes are online. Like this just feels so weird. And I think a lot of students ended up doing poorly on finals. And it's like, that's, really hard in itself. But it also at the same time, it's like, there's a global pandemic going on, and I think that was just really hard to accept. And I think that's definitely something a lot of students have struggled with, is just allowing themselves to just be okay with just dealing with these obstacles that were very unexpected on top of other obstacles students face.
Yes, I agree. I think the pandemic has made us all have to sit back and reflect on that sometimes things are bigger than what your day-to-day is, and you have to adjust and pivot and keep going, in the ways that you can.
Yeah. And I think a really good way to keep going at times like this is talking to friends. So I was wondering if you still talk to your college friends.
I do. I have a couple very good college friends. Again, I didn't have a huge social network because a lot of the friends I made were actually through my job. But I actually met a friend who we met freshman year in the dorms. We just had lunch last week, and it was so good to see her and connect. And it's fun to reflect on our journey. We were talking about summer after freshman year and all the fun we had. And it's just great to see all my friends and their careers and their families and what they've become since when I first met them.
Were a lot of your other friends also STEM majors, or were they all different kinds of majors, and your work friends as well?
So my work friends were not involved at Davis. I worked in Sacramento at a restaurant, and so no one else went to Davis. But then STEM majors, some of my close friends were STEM majors, and I met people through working in the lab. They were all STEM. But this good friend, she was not. And she ended up transferring out of Davis because it just wasn't the right fit. And went to an art school, and now does like interior design and staging, and is a yeah. So
That's really interesting.
yeah.
So I was kind of wondering if you could talk a little bit more about making friends. Did you try and make a friend in each class? Because I found for me, at least, it's always really good to have like at least one friend in each class, to have someone to talk to, complain with, you know, maybe like work on, as long as it's okay with the professor, work on like homework together, or like going over learning objectives. Did you find that something that you did in classes?
Yeah, I think from spending the first year in the dorms, I definitely had a social network from that. And so there would always be people in my classes who I would at least know and then would try and sit by and talk with. Because my schedule was so off with working, I didn't necessarily like meet up with people outside of class too often. I wish I would have been able to. But just my study hours were usually off from when a lot of people were studying because of my job. Yeah.
That makes sense. All right, moving on. I was wondering, what advice would you give to a current or prospective student? And it can be anything, it can be about personal things during college or just academics, like really anything. I think we would love to hear from you about that.
Yeah, so I think the piece of advice I like to give, and it's because I get a question or I notice it's something I've observed about many students that I can relate to feeling this way, is that you don't always have to have your path in your career figured out. I meet with students for letters of rec or other, or career advice, and I think there's this pressure in college to have to know what your career is, know what you want to do, and then have this whole plan laid out. Um, and when I was in college, I certainly didn't have a plan. I was first generation. I had no idea what I wanted to do. Um, and I think in that, what was important was that when I had opportunities that were meaningful and gave me opportunities to learn about careers or learn about experiences or build new skills, I would take them. And it was through taking new opportunities and learning about different careers and jobs and fields that my career took shape, but it was never anything I had planned. And so the one piece of advice is that it's okay to not have a plan, as long as you are active and engaged in the opportunities that might come your way to help shape that. And so I always see students so anxious or pressured to like figure it all out and what's going to happen. And I know that stress of wanting to know what's going to happen. And it's okay. Like, it's okay to not have it figured out. You don't necessarily know what's going to happen. And that opportunities end up coming your way. So that's the one piece of advice. And can I keep going on another one?
Yeah, please keep going. We want to hear it.
The other one, and I think this was also, I think it comes into also something that Davis helped shape me, is defining what success means for you. And so that was when I came to Davis, I thought I wanted to become a doctor because I thought that's what it meant to be successful. And, and everyone around me wanted to become doctors. Everyone in my, first year freshman intro bio wanted to be doctors. Like it was the thing to do. That's what meant you were successful. And if you didn't become a doctor or dentist, and and it was, I volunteered at the hospital. I learned more about what it's like to be a doctor and the path to becoming a doctor. And it became clear that that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. And so when I decided it wasn't what I wanted to do, there was this part of me that felt like, oh, does that mean I'm not going to be successful? Because I don't want to do that. And so Davis helped shape and build confidence in me, and that there are these other things, there's other ways that I can be extremely successful and define success for myself. And so I think it's really important to kind of for everyone to reflect on who they are and what they want, and that success can be so many different things, and to not let other people define what success is for you, but to define what your own success is and go after that.
And I was kind of wondering, based on what you're saying, did you kind of cultivate and learn about what your new idea of success was by talking to professors, other students, or did you go to events on campus? Like, how did you kind of come to this?
I think no. I mean, I kind of just meandered into it. I was through getting into the lab and then learning about research and enjoying research, and then learning more about what it means to get your PhD. So I think for me, defining what it was to be success was to understand and learn about different options. Right. And then to realize like, oh, I enjoy doing this. And so I should keep doing this because I enjoy it. And, to get in the lab and do well, that like I felt successful doing that. And then to get into a PhD program, because that's what I wanted to do. I felt very successful in doing that. And so, but I wouldn't have known about those as successes for me until, again, taking those opportunities. And so I think it was by networking and by exposing myself to new experiences for things I didn't learn about or things I didn't know about.
Interesting. And that kind of just made me think, I really liked taking a bunch of GEs. Even though I was a science major, I thought it was really interesting getting a chance to learn about something else. Like, for example, I was an art history minor, and I find there's actually a lot of push, at least when I was talking to advisors, to have kind of a minor that's just kind of different and for fun. So were there any like GEs that you took that had nothing to do with science necessarily that you found rather interesting and that also helped you shape to kind of what you are today?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think some of the GEs were some of my favorite classes because they allowed me to learn about things I never thought about. And I think they gave me new perspectives of viewing the world that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So I did an American Studies class, AMS 10, and it was taught by going through the decades, starting in the early 1900s, where we learned about each decade through the music that was popular at the time. And it was just so, I loved this class, you know, and it was something, things I knew nothing about. And so I learned so much. That class always stuck out. It was, you know, I really, yeah, I loved the GEs. There was a women's studies class also that I loved. And again, just learning about things I normally wouldn't think about.
Interesting. What were some of your favorite songs, if you can remember, from that class that you used to cover different time periods?
You know, it wasn't specific songs. It was more like the genres, like learning about jazz or pop at the time. So it wasn't specific songs that I can recall. Yeah.
However, since we are talking about music, what are some of your favorite songs? Since you do run, you mentioned that. What are some of your songs on your running playlist?
Oh.
Or motivational songs too for studying? I think are really fun to hear.
I don't know if I can name them specifically. I listen to, because I do a lot of actually like weightlifting now, not as much running. And so I listen to kind of a lot of like rap. It gets me going. Yeah, so I don't have any like specific songs or some might not be appropriate to say.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I really like listening when I'm studying. It depends on like what I'm studying, obviously, but if I'm doing something like math, I really like listening to like old Maroon 5 songs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's really fun.
I used to study, I really like Florence and the Machine.
Oh,
I
okay.
used to listen to Florence and the Machine a lot. And I think at the time, was it? Oh, I don't remember what I used to listen when I was an undergrad, I would listen to Incubus a lot.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Did Spotify exist? Say I love Spotify, and I don't like doing college without Spotify or like YouTube to just pull up songs. I feel like it'd be very different, but
Spotify, and I don't even know if YouTube was around. I've iTunes Music.
in 2007, I feel like that was my first experience watching. What was it called? Like Potter Pals. I think that was my experience. But yeah, it's so different now too, because there's so many professors that use YouTube, like you with your Gene Flicks, to teach concepts, and I think that's really interesting too. Do you think that's something you'll continue to do after the pandemic?
Yeah, I think so. I'm definitely getting more comfortable making the videos. I'm a little burnt out on making videos right now, so I'm not actively making them. And I've made so many, so I think it'll be a matter of identifying topics that students, or thinking of new, more creative ways for reviewing the topics, instead of just like the straight lecture.
Okay, interesting. And we are getting a little bit short on time, so I just wanted to ask you, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but what was your most memorable course that you took?
So my most memorable course, the course that changed my life, was BIS 101, Genes and Gene Expression. I took it in Herring Hall, spring
Gary.
quarter. Spring quarter. And it was the first upper division genetics class I took, and I was a genetics major. And when I took that, I'd never done as well or felt more confident in a class. And it was coming right after returning from my car accident. And so it was just this really great experience that gave me confidence in my ability to continue to succeed as a student. And that class, that's what I loved, all the topics. And then that class is what got me into the lab and got me on this journey. And now when I came back to Davis, the first class I taught was BIS 101. So now I'm teaching it again. And that was never the plan. I'm teaching again. And the very first time I taught it was back in Herring Hall. And so I remember walking in, and I was like, and I remember looking at the seat that I used to sit in, and it was just this I don't know, this experience, this full circle experience of like, wow, this was not what I had planned on or thought I would ever be now teaching this class that completely changed the trajectory of my career and helping me to figure out what I want to do in so many ways.
Wow, that's really interesting that that's the class you ended up teaching, considering that's the class you got into the lab from. So that's really cool. Who taught the class, and do they still teach at Davis?
They do, Dr. Joanne Engebrecht.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Another class that was really memorable was BIS 104, which is cell biology, and it was taught by Dr. Dan Starr, who is still here teaching it.
I had him too for
Yeah,
so
yeah. So in that class, it was like right when clickers began. And so it was the first class where I used clickers. And the reason that class was so memorable because it gave me a new way of appreciating learning in that it wasn't just memorization, but it was really understanding the concepts and how, the cellular processes worked. And I really enjoyed how we were challenged to think critically and to apply what we were learning. And so it made me change how I approached learning. And that's why that class was so memorable.
interesting. I actually just wanted to ask one more bonus question since we did have just a little bit of time.
Anything.
And I was just wondering, since you did end up doing your undergrad and your graduate education here, what were some of the reasons you wanted to do your graduate education at Davis as well?
So I like getting these questions about what made me go to grad school and why did I stay here? Totally practical reasons, which I think is okay. So when I chose to get my PhD because I really enjoyed science, I didn't have any other great options. And I found out that getting my PhD wouldn't cost me anything in the sciences. And so those were all the reasons. I chose Davis to stay at Davis, primarily for family reasons. I grew up in Sacramento, Northern California, and I was really close with my family. The other schools I got into were similar to Davis, and so I just didn't have a strong pull to move anywhere. I really like Northern California. I really like the Davis itself, and so I chose to stay, and I'm glad I did. So I think it was more just enjoying this area and enjoying the school and not really having, I just never had my own strong desire to move elsewhere.
All right. Can I ask, you did mention that graduate school was free of cost, I believe. And this is something I've heard, but I don't think it's something a ton of students really know or understand. So if you could kind of explain that more, I think this is something a lot of people can get benefit from hearing. So if you could talk about that just a
Yeah,
little.
so I learned that by working in a lab as an undergrad and talking to a PhD students. And I was like, how much does it cost? How many loans do you have? And they're like, oh no, the lab that I work in has a grant, and so they pay for my school and I get a stipend. It's not much, like you're barely making it. But I said, wait, what? I can get a PhD for free? I said, well, then that's clearly the decision I'm gonna make. And again, I didn't have any other, I didn't have this path laid out for me. So typically PhDs in the sciences, because you spend so much time working in the lab that you are working in has federal funding, or the program has funding that helps to support your tuition. And then if there's circumstances where that's not the case, you would TA. Okay. And so in all these cases for your PhD in the sciences, they typically don't require you to take out student loans to pay for them. And so for me, again, because I was funding all of my education, that was a very big selling point for deciding to go on that. And I loved research. So I was interested in research careers. I loved it. And then I found out that it was free. So it was kind of, I was like, well, it makes sense to keep on this path that I'm on.
Okay. Well, that's really, really great information that I think a lot of people will be very happy to hear, because that is something I did hear before applying to grad school about it being free to get a PhD, but I didn't really understand fully why. I knew you could TA or there was grants, but I think that's really just great information for a lot of students to hear. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for coming on today and talking about your experiences. We're really glad to have had you. And do you have anything else you'd like to add before we close?
No, thank you so much for having me. It's so great to to be able to come here and share my story. And I hope if any students, if it resonates, you're free to contact me. Again, I've experienced Davis in many different roles. And so I think it gives me a pretty neat perspective as a faculty member, because when I walk around campus, I still feel like an undergraduate student. So I think that since that was my main identity when I first came to Davis, when I walk around, I still feel like I'm this undergraduate walking around. And so I don't know, I think it helps me be able to relate to students a lot, because I remember what it was like.
You're just a really understanding professor, and I feel like you can really sympathize with us. And it's easy to see why after our interview today. So thank you so much for being such an amazing professor, and Davis is really lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm so happy to be here, and I think I'm so happy. I love all of the students, and I think one thing about Davis and just this academic life is that like everyone's there to try and get better, be better, improve. And so it's so cool. I feel so honored to be part of that and to be able to be someone that is there to help students, get to where they want to be.
That's awesome. Really good to hear. For parting words. All right. Thank you everyone for watching. Bye.
Bye.
Next time, we'll be chatting with Paul David Terry, the Assistant Director of Programs at our Cal Alumni Association and, of course, a UC Davis alumni. Paul shares his love for many different UC Davis communities, and I can't wait for you to find out what he's been up to. Till then, take care and go Ags!